I knew the blind date was doomed the moment she checked her phone before even sitting down, sighed like the world owed her something, and said, "So, you're shorter than your pictures," even though I was exactly the height I'd listed. The restaurant was warm, softly lit, one of those places where couples lean toward each other and laugh quietly, forks clinking, candles flickering like they believed in romance. Meanwhile, I sat across from someone who looked like she was waiting for an emergency call to rescue her. She spent the first 10 minutes talking about her ex, how he was toxic but rich, boring but tall, awful but unforgettable, and every sentence landed like a small hammer on my patience. I tried to steer the conversation toward anything else, travel, books, food, but she kept circling back to herself, correcting the waiter, complaining about the menu, criticizing the music. At one point she leaned back, scanned the room, and said, "I usually don't do coffee or cheap dinners, but I figured I'd lower my standards once." I smiled, nodded, and felt something inside me quietly deflate. I noticed the couple at the next table laughing, a woman with expressive eyes and an easy smile, listening more than she talked, occasionally glancing my way, not staring, just noticing. My date didn't notice anything except her reflection in the spoon. When the food arrived, she pushed her plate away after one bite and announced she was watching carbs, then asked if I was going to eat all that. I was. Mostly because it gave me something to do with my hands. The final straw came when she answered a call mid-sentence, turned away from me, and said loudly, "Yeah, it's bad. I'll explain later. I might leave early." I realized I was already alone at the table, just physically accompanied. I paid the bill while she was still talking, stood up, and said politely, "It was nice meeting you. I think we're done here." She blinked, surprised, shrugged, and said, "Probably for the best," as if she'd fired me. I walked toward the exit with a strange mix of relief and embarrassment, heat crawling up my neck, wondering how I kept agreeing to blind dates that felt like job interviews I hadn't applied for. That's when I heard it, soft but clear, from the table beside where I'd been sitting. "Hey," the woman with the expressive eyes said. I turned, confused. She smiled, a little nervous, a little brave. "If you're free," she added, gesturing to the empty chair across from her, "you can sit here." For a second I thought she was joking, or being kind out of pity, but there was nothing pitying about her expression. Just warmth. Just curiosity. I laughed awkwardly and said, "Are you serious?" She nodded. "I've been watching that date slowly crash and burn for the last hour. You look like you could use a reset." Her friend across from her raised an eyebrow and smirked. I hesitated, because who does that? Who invites a stranger fresh off a terrible date to sit with them? But something in me, maybe exhaustion, maybe hope, pulled the chair back. "I'm Sam," I said. Well, recently single again, apparently." She laughed, not loudly, but genuinely. "I'm Lena," she said. "And this is Maya. Don't worry, we don't usually collect strangers, but tonight felt off." The conversation flowed like it had been waiting for me. No interrogations. No performances. We talked about how blind dates feel like speed trials for compatibility, about bad first impressions, about how people reveal themselves in small moments, how they talk to waiters, how they listen, how they laugh. Lena listened in a way that made me feel seen, leaning forward slightly, eyes focused, smiling at the right moments. When I told a self-deprecating story, she didn't rush to reassure me, she laughed with me. Time shifted. The restaurant noise faded into a pleasant hum. At some point Maya excused herself, giving Lena a look that said everything without words. I realized we'd been talking for over an hour. The waiter brought another round without asking. Lena glanced at me and said, "You know, This was supposed to be a quick dinner. I didn't expect to spend it rescuing a stranger. I smiled. You didn't rescue me, I said. You just noticed. She held my gaze for a beat longer than necessary. Sometimes that's enough, she said. When we finally stood to leave, the night felt different, lighter. Outside, the air was cool, city lights reflecting off the pavement. We lingered, neither of us quite ready to say goodbye. Listen, she said, tucking her hair behind her ear. I'm glad you sat down. I nodded. Me too. That was the best part of my night. She smiled, pulled out her phone, and said, Then let's not make it a one-time thing. As I walked home later, phone buzzing with a new message from Lena. Did you make it back okay? I realized something had shifted. One terrible date hadn't ruined the night. It had led me exactly where I needed to be. And if you're watching this thinking about all the awkward dinners, the missed connections, the nights that felt like failures, don't go anywhere. Sometimes the story doesn't start where you think it will. Subscribe, because the next chapter is where things really change. The next morning, I woke up smiling before I remembered why, which felt like a small miracle. Lena's message was still there, and so was the quiet certainty that what happened wasn't just luck, it was timing, courage, and someone choosing kindness over indifference. We started texting casually, then constantly, the way conversations do when there's no pressure to impress. A few days later, we met again, this time intentionally, at a small cafe she loved because the owner remembered regulars' names. Watching her greet him, ask about his daughter, thank him sincerely, I understood something important. Attraction grows in the presence of respect. We talked about our pasts, not to unload, but to understand. She told me about a relationship where she'd felt invisible, how it taught her the value of being with someone who notices the quiet things. I told her about dates that felt like auditions, about the fear of not being enough, about walking away from tables feeling smaller than when I arrived. She reached across the table, not dramatically, just enough for her fingers to touch mine. You don't have to earn your place, she said softly. You already have one. Over the weeks, our connection deepened in unshowy ways. Long walks, shared playlists, comfortable silences. We argued once, early on, about something trivial, and instead of shutting down, we talked it through, laughing at ourselves. That's when I knew this wasn't just chemistry, it was alignment. One night, months later, we went back to the same restaurant. Same table. Same lighting. We ordered dessert first, because we could. At some point Lena looked around and said, Imagine if you'd stayed through that date. I laughed. Imagine if you hadn't spoken up. She squeezed my hand. I almost didn't, she admitted. But I thought, if I don't say something now, I'll regret it. I realized how many moments in life hinge on that exact thought. Regret or risk. Silence or courage. The night ended the way it always did, with us walking slowly, inventing excuses not to say goodbye. And standing there, city breathing around us, I thought about the people watching this right now. The ones who feel stuck in loops of disappointment, who think one bad experience defines the whole story. It doesn't. Sometimes the worst moment is just a doorway. Sometimes the person meant for you is one table away, waiting for you to stand up. If this story made you feel something, hope, recognition, the courage to try again, then stay with us. Subscribe to the channel, because more stories like this are coming. Stories about timing, kindness, and the quiet moments that change everything. And remember, even the worst date can lead to the right seat. Life didn't suddenly turn into a movie montage just because Lena and I found each other, but something quieter and stronger began to grow, routine mixed with intention. The kind of connection that doesn't need constant excitement to feel alive. We learned each other's rhythms, how she needed silence before coffee, how I paced when I was thinking, how we both hated unresolved tension more than being wrong. There were ordinary days that became memorable simply because we shared them. Grocery shopping debates over cereal brands, late-night walks where we planned imaginary trips, mornings where we lingered longer than necessary just to avoid saying goodbye. And yet, underneath all that comfort, there was a fragile awareness that good things feel precious precisely because they once felt impossible. One evening, after a long day, we sat on her couch with the lights off, city glows spilling through the window, and she asked me a question that stopped me mid-breath. "Do you ever think about how close we came to never meeting?" I did. Often. I told her how that terrible blind date had almost convinced me to stop trying altogether, how easy it would have been to leave without looking back. She leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "I'm glad you didn't." Not dramatically. Just honestly. Weeks later, I met her parents, warm, observant people who asked real questions and listened to the answers. Watching Lena laugh with them, seeing where her kindness came from, made me feel like I wasn't just dating her. I was stepping into a future that made sense. She met my friends too, winning them over without trying, noticing the shy ones, remembering names, laughing at inside jokes she hadn't earned yet but respected enough to wait for. And then came the night everything quietly confirmed itself. We returned once more to that restaurant, not out of nostalgia, but coincidence. Same corner. Same soft music. A different couple sat at the table next to us, and the energy felt familiar in an uncomfortable way. The woman looked bored. The man looked like he was trying too hard. Halfway through their meal, the man stood up, frustration written all over his face, and walked toward the exit. As he passed our table, our eyes met. I recognized that look, the mix of embarrassment and resignation. Without thinking, Lena reached out and gently said, "Hey." He paused. "You're not alone," she added, smiling kindly. "Sometimes the night just needs a second chance." He hesitated, then nodded like someone who'd just been reminded to breathe. Watching him sit down at the bar instead of leaving entirely, I felt something full circle settle inside me. Later, walking home, Lena squeezed my hand and said, "Funny how life echoes itself." I smiled. Yeah. But this time, I knew where to sit. Months passed. Plans became shared. Futures became plural. And one night, as we stood on her balcony watching the city lights flicker like quiet promises, she said, "I didn't save you that night." I turned to her. "I know," I said. "You just invited me to stay." That's what this story really is. Not about bad dates or lucky timing, but about noticing, about choosing to speak, about sitting down instead of walking away. If you're watching this and you've ever felt unseen, dismissed, or ready to give up, stay. Subscribe to this channel. Because stories like this aren't rare, they're just waiting for the right moment, the right courage, and the right seat at the table. And sometimes, all it takes to change everything is one person saying, "If you're free, sit here."